The stars burned cold and distant above the planet Prime, of the dragon people who had conquered half the known galaxy. Their cities rose like mountains of black stone and glowing crystal, built to honor the ancient beasts that gave their species its name. And at the heart of the greatest city stood the arena of flames, where warriors from 100 worlds came to prove their worth. Empress sat upon her throne of forged metal and dragon bone, watching the crowd gather below. She was tall and powerful, her scales the color of deep purple storms, her eyes like molten gold. Two curved horns rose from her head like a crown, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of royal blood. Today was the day of the challenge. Today, another fool would try to tame her dragon. Slept in the pit below the arena, its massive body coiled like a sleeping god. It was not a creature of flesh and blood like the dragons of old legends, was something far more terrifying. Its scales were made of living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid silver. Its eyes burned with the light of dying stars. Fire and lightning crackled beneath its chrome skin, and when it roared, the sound could shatter stone. The dragon had been bonded to the royal family for 10,000 years. Every empress, every emperor had ridden upon its back, but the bond was not given freely. It had to be earned. And so, 300 years ago, Empress had created the challenge. Any warrior from any world could try to tame. If they succeeded, they would become the Empress's champion, the most honored position in the entire empire. They would sit at her right hand and command her armies. They would be granted wealth, power, and glory beyond imagination. 93 had tried, 93 had failed. The crowd roared as the 94th challenger entered the arena. He was a species known throughout the galaxy for their savage strength. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in thick plates of natural armor. His forearms each carried a weapon, 2 swords, an axe, and a hammer. His people had never been conquered in war, and he had killed more enemies than he could count. His name was, and he was certain he would succeed where all others had failed. The gates opened and rose from its sleep. The metallic dragon uncoiled slowly, its chrome scales catching the light of the twin suns. It was enormous, larger than a starship, and when it spread its wings, they blocked out the sky. The dragon looked down at the warrior with ancient, burning eyes, and it saw what it always saw. Another fool who thought strength was enough. Charged with a battle cry that shook the arena, he swung his weapons with the force of a crashing meteor, striking at the dragon's legs, its chest, its neck. Each blow would have killed a normal creature 100 times over, but was not normal. The weapons bounced off its scales like rain off stone. The dragon did not even seem to notice. Then moved. One sweep of its tail sent flying across the arena. He crashed into the wall hard enough to crack the ancient stone. Before he could rise, the dragon was upon him, pinning him down with one massive claw. Cosmic fire gathered in its throat, hot enough to melt starship hulls. Screamed his surrender. The crowd fell silent as there was dragged from the arena, broken and bleeding. Another challenger had failed. Another warrior had learned that strength alone could not tame the metallic dragon. Empress watched it all with tired eyes. She had seen this same scene play out 94 times now. Different warriors, different species, different weapons and powers, but always the same result. They came with pride and left with shame. They came seeking glory and found only pain. Perhaps, she thought, no outsider could ever tame. Perhaps the challenge had been a mistake from the beginning. It was then that her guards brought the prisoner before her. He was small, this creature, smaller than any warrior who had ever stood in her arena. His skin was soft and bare, without scales or armor or fur. He had no claws, no fangs, no visible weapons. He stood before her throne in simple gray clothes, his hands bound, his eyes calm. He was human, the first human she had ever seen. Her advisors had told her about his capture. His ship had crashed in their territory 2 days ago, a tiny vessel barely worthy of the name. He claimed to be a traveler, an engineer, a man of no importance. He claimed his species was peaceful, that they meant no harm to the great empire. Did not care about any of that. She cared only that he was different, and different things interested her. The human watched as the was carried away. He watched as servants cleaned the blood from the arena floor. He watched as returned to its resting place, smoke rising from its nostrils. Then he asked a question that made the entire court fall silent. Why does everyone try to fight it? Leaned forward on her throne. No one had ever asked her that question before. The answer seemed so obvious that it needed no explanation. Was a beast of war, a creature of fire and metal. Of course warriors tried to fight it. That was what warriors did. But the human was looking at the dragon with strange eyes. Not fear, not hunger for glory, not the burning need to prove himself. He looked at the way a mechanic might look at a broken engine, the way a doctor might look at a sick patient. He looked at it like he was trying to understand it. "What is your name, human?" asked. "Jake," he said, "Jake Mercer." "And what are you, Jake Mercer? A warrior, a champion, a conqueror?" The human smiled, and there was something strange in that smile, something she could not quite understand. "No," he said, "I fix things, I build things, I figure out how things work." The Empress studied him for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. "You interest me, human. You will stay as my guest. You will watch the challenge. And perhaps, if you are not as foolish as you appear, you will learn something about the nature of true strength." Jake Mercer nodded and let himself be led away to comfortable quarters. But as he walked, he kept looking back at the arena, at the sleeping dragon, at the stains of blood on the ancient stone. He was already beginning to understand something that 94 warriors had missed. Was not a challenge to be conquered. It was a puzzle to be solved. 2 weeks passed on a prime, and Jake Mercer watched everything. He watched the servants who fed, throwing great chunks of processed metal into the pit for the dragon to consume. He watched the priests who chanted ancient prayers before each challenge, calling upon gods whose names had been forgotten everywhere else in the galaxy. He watched the warriors who came from distant stars, each one certain that they would be the one to succeed. And he watched most of all. The dragon fascinated him in ways he could not fully explain. It was not just a beast. It was a machine, a living thing, and something else entirely, all wrapped into one. Its metal scales moved like real skin. Its fire burned with colors that should not exist in nature. And its eyes, those ancient burning eyes, held an intelligence that no one else seemed to notice. Jake noticed. Jake always noticed things. The 95th Challenger arrived on a ship made of pure thought. His name was Commander, and he came from the Dominion, a civilization of telepaths who had conquered entire star systems without firing a single weapon. They simply reached into the minds of their enemies and broke them from the inside. Was the most powerful telepath his species had ever produced. He had shattered armies with his thoughts. He had driven emperors mad with a whisper. He believed that the dragon was simply another mind to be dominated, another will to be crushed beneath his own. Jake watched from the viewing platform as entered the arena. There was a tall, thin creature with pale blue skin and no eyes. He did not need eyes. He saw the world through the minds of others. He felt their thoughts, their fears, their deepest secrets. He reached out to touch the mind of. For one moment nothing happened, then began to scream. The dragon's mind was not like anything he had ever encountered. It was not organic, not a simple pattern of thoughts and emotions that could be controlled. It was a maze of ancient code and primal instinct, machine logic and bestial rage, all twisted together into something that no telepath could ever hope to understand. Tried to pull away, but he was trapped. The dragon's mind pulled him in deeper, showing him things that broke something inside him. He saw the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. He felt the weight of 10,000 years of loneliness. He experienced what it meant to be, and the experience nearly destroyed him. When the guards finally dragged from the arena, he was still screaming. He would never stop screaming. His mind was broken beyond repair, shattered against the walls of an ancient intelligence that was older than his entire civilization. The crowd was silent. Even the proudest warriors looked troubled. This was not the failure of strength or skill. This was something worse. This was proof that could not be conquered by any known means. But still, one more challenger remained. The Undying entered the arena 3 days later. He was not flesh and blood at all, but silicon and crystal, a living mineral being from a world of eternal fire. His species did not feel pain. They could not die. Himself had been destroyed 7 times and had always rebuilt himself from nothing. His plan was simple. He could not defeat the dragon, but he could outlast it. He would let tear him apart again and again until the beast grew tired, until it gave up, until it finally accepted him as its master. It was not a plan. It was stubbornness pretending to be strategy. Jake watched from the platform as walked calmly toward the dragon. He watched as rose from its rest, fire already building in its throat. He watched as the dragon struck, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Then slowly, the pieces began to pull themselves back together. The dragon struck again, and again, and again. For 3 hours destroyed. It burned him with cosmic fire. It crushed him with claws of living metal. It tore him apart and scattered his pieces across the arena floor, and each time rebuilt himself and stood once more. But there was something wrong. Each time he reformed, he was a little smaller. Each time he stood, he was a little slower. The dragon's fire was not normal fire. It burned on a level that even could not withstand. It was erasing him, piece by piece, atom by atom. After 3 hours, finally understood. He was not outlasting the dragon. The dragon was outlasting him. If he continued, there would be nothing left to rebuild. He screamed his surrender, and what remained of his body was carried from the arena. 96 challengers had tried. 96 challengers had failed. Empress stood before her court that night, her face unreadable. Her advisors spoke in hushed voices about ending the challenge forever, about admitting that no outsider could ever tame. The dragon belonged to the royal blood, they said. It always had. It always would. Then a voice spoke from the back of the throne room. "I would like to try." Everyone turned. Jake Mercer stood there in his simple gray clothes, looking smaller and weaker than ever before. The court erupted in laughter. Even the servants smiled behind their hands. This tiny, soft creature thought he could succeed where Commander and the Undying had failed. One of the Empress's generals stepped forward, still laughing. "Human, do you even know what you're asking? You have no weapons, no powers, no natural defenses. The dragon will kill you before you can even beg for mercy." Jake nodded calmly. "Maybe, but I'd still like to try." "Why?" the general demanded. "What makes you think you have any chance at all?" Jake was quiet for a moment. He thought about everything he had seen over the past 2 weeks. The warriors who charged in with weapons swinging. The telepath who tried to dominate the dragon's mind. The crystal being who thought he could simply outlast an ancient god. They had all tried to conquer. They had all treated it as an enemy to be defeated, and they had all failed. "Because," Jake said finally, "I'm not going to fight it." The laughter stopped. Everyone stared at him in confusion. Empress stepped forward, her golden eyes studying the human with new interest. There was something in his voice, something in his strange calm that caught her attention. He was not boasting. He was not trying to impress her. He simply believed what he was saying, and that belief was more interesting than any warrior's pride. "Very well, human," she said. "Tomorrow you will enter the arena, and we will see if your strange confidence is wisdom or foolishness." Jake bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, Empress." As he was led back to his quarters, the entire court whispered about the mad human who thought he could tame a dragon without fighting it. They expected entertainment. They would get something else entirely. The morning sun rose over the arena of flames, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The stands were full, packed with more spectators than any previous challenge had drawn. Word had spread across the city about the strange human who planned to face without weapons, without powers, without any apparent plan at all. They came to watch him die. They expected it to be quick. Jake Mercer stood at the gates of the arena, a small bag slung over his shoulder. The guards had searched it and found nothing dangerous inside, just tools, wrenches and welders and scanners and other things that made no sense in a warrior's arena. The captain of the guard shook his head in disbelief. "You're really going through with this, human?" Jake nodded. "I am." "The dragon will kill you, you know that, right?" "Maybe," Jake smiled slightly. "But everyone keeps saying that and I'm still not scared. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" The captain had no answer for that. The gates opened, and Jake Mercer walked into the arena. The crowd fell silent as he crossed the sand. He was so small, so fragile, so utterly unremarkable. Compared to the massive warriors who had come before him, he looked like a child wandering into a battlefield. There was nothing special about him at all. And yet he walked without fear. Stirred in the center of the arena, the metallic dragon lifted its great head, its burning eyes focusing on the tiny human approaching. Steam rose from its nostrils. Fire crackled beneath its chrome scales. Every instinct in its ancient mind told it that this was another challenger, another fool who needed to be taught the lesson that 96 others had learned. The dragon rose to its full height and roared. The sound was like a thunderstorm made solid. It shook the arena walls and sent loose stones tumbling from the stands. Several spectators covered their ears and looked away. The sound alone had broken weaker challengers. Jake stopped walking. He closed his eyes and let the roar wash over him. Then, when the echo faded, he did something that no one expected. He sat down. Right there in the middle of the arena, Jake Mercer sat cross-legged on the sand and placed his bag beside him. He did not reach for his tools. He did not try to run or hide or fight. He simply sat and watched the dragon with calm, curious eyes. Was confused. For 10,000 years, challengers had charged at it with weapons drawn. They had attacked with fury and desperation and pride. They had treated it as an enemy to be destroyed. But this human did none of those things. He just sat there, watching, waiting for something that the dragon did not understand. Minutes passed, then hours. The crowd grew restless. They had come to see a battle, not a human sitting in the sand doing nothing. Some began to boo and shout insults. Others demanded that the Empress end the challenge and declare the human a coward. But Empress raised her hand for silence. She was watching the arena with great interest. Something was happening down there, something she had never seen before. Was circling the human. The dragon moved around Jake like a great cat stalking prey. It snapped its jaws near his head, close enough that Jake could feel the heat of its breath. It swept its tail through the sand, sending up clouds of dust. It tried everything to make him react, to make him run, to make him fight. Jake did not move. He sat perfectly still, breathing slowly, watching the dragon with those strange, calm eyes. He was not afraid. He was not angry. He was not trying to prove anything at all. He was simply present. As the sun moved across the sky, something began to change. Circles grew wider. Its snapping jaws came less often. The fire in its eyes dimmed from rage to curiosity. For the first time in centuries, the dragon encountered something it did not understand. A creature that did not want to hurt it. When night fell, Jake finally moved. He opened his bag and pulled out a small scanner, a device that could detect heat signatures and structural weaknesses. He aimed it at the dragon, not as a weapon, but as a tool for understanding. Watched him carefully, but did not attack. Jake studied the readings on his scanner. He frowned slightly. Then he looked at the dragon's back left leg, the one it always favored when it walked. "There," he said quietly, speaking to himself, "there's the problem." He saw what no one else had seen. Deep in the joint of the dragon's leg, hidden beneath layers of living metal, was damage. Old damage. Centuries old, maybe longer. A wound that had never healed, pain that had never stopped. Had been hurting for longer than most civilizations had existed. And no one had ever noticed because they were too busy trying to conquer it. Jake put away his scanner and pulled out his welding tools. Slowly, carefully, he stood up and began to approach the dragon, not from the front where it could easily strike him, from the side where it could see his hands, where it could see that he held no weapons. "Easy," Jake said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to help." Growled, but it was a warning growl, not an attack. It was telling him to stay back, to be careful. Jake stopped, he waited. When the dragon calmed, he took another step, then another. The crowd watched in stunned silence. No one had ever gotten this close to without being attacked. No one had ever approached the dragon with kindness instead of aggression. Jake reached the dragon's side. He could feel the heat radiating from its metal scales. He could see the ancient intelligence in its burning eyes, and in those eyes he saw something that broke his heart. Loneliness. This creature had lived for 10,000 years. It had been and feared and challenged and attacked, but it had never been understood. It had never been cared for. It had never had a friend. "I see you," Jake whispered. "I see what they did to you, and I'm sorry." The dragon did not move. Jake knelt beside its damaged leg and began to work. The welding torch flared in the darkness, sending sparks dancing into the night air. Jake worked slowly and carefully, repairing damage that had gone untreated for centuries. The metal was strange, unlike anything he had ever worked with before. But metal was metal, and Jake Mercer had been fixing broken things his entire life. By dawn he had finished. Stood and tested its leg. For the first time in 500 years, there was no pain. The dragon turned its great head and looked at the human who had done this impossible thing. And in its ancient, burning eyes, something shifted. This was not a challenger. This was something else entirely. 3 days passed, and Jake Mercer did not leave the arena. The rules of the challenge did not require him to stay. He could have returned to his quarters, slept in a comfortable bed, eaten proper meals. But Jake understood something important. Trust was not built in moments. Trust was built in time, in presence, in the simple act of staying when you could leave. So he stayed. The servants brought him food and water, lowering baskets from the viewing platforms. The crowd came and went, watching in confusion as the human continued his strange approach. They did not understand what they were seeing. They had come to watch a battle, and instead they were watching something that had no name in their language. They were watching a friendship being born. On the first day, Jake explored the arena while watched. He walked along the walls, studied the ancient stones, examined the scorch marks left by 10,000 years of dragon fire. He talked as he walked, not expecting the dragon to understand his words, but knowing that tone of voice mattered more than meaning. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" he said. "Trapped in this pit, brought out only to fight, to burn, to destroy. That's not much of a life." Followed him with its eyes. The dragon did not growl or threaten. It simply watched, still trying to understand this strange creature who showed no fear. Jake found a spot against the wall where the afternoon sun cast warm shadows. He sat down and pulled out one of his tools, a small device that projected holographic images. He had used it for engineering work, to visualize complex structures before building them. But now he used it for something different. He projected an image of Earth. It hung in the air before him, a small blue and green sphere spinning slowly in the darkness. Jake looked at it with sad, distant eyes. He had not seen his in 5 years. He might never see it again. "That's where I come from," he told the dragon. "It's not much compared to all this. No great empire, no ancient traditions, no dragons. Just a little planet full of people who are still trying to figure out their place in the universe." Moved closer. Its great head lowered, and its burning eyes studied the holographic image with something like curiosity. "We're not strong like the," Jake continued. "We're not powerful telepaths like the. We don't have natural armor or regeneration or any of the things that make other species special. But we have one thing that seems to matter more than all of that." The dragon waited. "We notice things. We pay attention. We look at something everyone else has given up on, and we ask ourselves, what if there's another way?" On the second day, Jake learned to read the dragon's moods. Communicated through movement, through sound, through subtle changes in the heat of its body. When it was content, its scales lay flat and smooth, reflecting light like a calm sea. When it was agitated, they rose slightly, edges catching the light at sharp angles. When it was curious, its head tilted to one side and a soft humming sound came from deep in its chest. Jake learned to respond in kind. He moved slowly when the dragon was nervous. He gave it space when it needed to be alone. He approached only when invited, only when posture told him it was welcome. The crowd watched in growing amazement as the human and the dragon developed a language of their own. They saw Jake touch the dragon's scales gently, and instead of being burned or torn apart, he was tolerated. They saw lower its head to Jake's level, allowing the human to look directly into its ancient eyes. On the evening of the second day, Jake discovered that could understand him. Not his words exactly. The dragon's mind was too different, too alien to process human language the way humans did, but it understood intent, emotion, meaning. When Jake spoke with kindness, the dragon felt that kindness. When he spoke with respect, the dragon recognized that respect. And when Jake asked questions, tried to answer. The dragon could not speak in words, but it could create images. Fire and heat were its tools, and it used them to paint pictures in the air. Burning symbols that faded as quickly as they appeared. Shapes that meant things Jake could not quite understand. Jake watched and learned. He began to piece together fragments of the dragon's history, 10,000 years of service to the Empire. Countless battles, countless victories, countless years of solitude in this stone pit. A creature of immense power, treated as a weapon instead of a being. "They never asked you what you wanted, did they?" Jake said quietly. "They just assumed they knew. They bonded you to their bloodline without asking permission. They brought you out to fight without asking if you wanted to fight. And when warriors came to challenge you, they never once wondered if you were tired of challenges." Was silent for a long moment. Then it created a new image, a burst of flame that formed a simple shape. A single figure, standing alone under an empty sky. "Loneliness," Jake said. "That's what you felt all this time. Not anger, not hatred, just loneliness." The dragon bowed its great head. On the third night, Jake made a choice that would define everything that followed. He was exhausted, 3 days without proper sleep, surviving on rationed food and stolen moments of rest. His body begged him to leave the arena, to find a bed, to recover his strength. But he knew that if he left now, something precious would be broken. Trust was fragile, it had to be protected. So Jake found a sheltered spot near the arena wall, wrapped himself in his jacket, and lay down to sleep. Completely vulnerable, completely exposed, within striking distance of a creature that had killed warriors far stronger than him. He was telling something that words could never say. "I trust you with my life." The dragon watched him close his eyes. It watched his breathing slow. It watched him surrender to sleep, defenseless and alone. For a long time did not move. Then slowly, carefully, the dragon rose and walked toward the sleeping human. Its massive body made almost no sound on the sand. Its ancient eyes studied Jake's peaceful face. And then did something it had never done for any creature in 10,000 years. It curled its body around the human, forming a protective wall of living metal. Its great head rested near Jake's feet, its tail wrapped around to complete the circle. Heat radiated from its scales, keeping the human warm against the cold night air. When Jake woke at dawn, he found himself surrounded by the dragon, protected, safe, chosen. And he understood that everything had changed. The arena had never been so silent. Every seat was filled. They had come from across the planet to witness this final day. Word had spread through the Empire and beyond, reaching distant star systems and civilizations that had never heard of humans before. A small, weak creature from an unknown world had spent 3 days in the arena with and survived. More than survived. He had done something that no one could explain. Empress sat upon her throne, her golden eyes fixed on the scene below. Her advisors stood around her, whispering concerns and doubts. This was unprecedented. This was impossible. This challenged everything they believed about power and dominance and the nature of strength. In the arena, Jake Mercer stood beside. The great dragon was calm, its burning eyes peaceful for the first time in living memory. It no longer watched Jake as a threat or a challenger. It watched him as something else entirely. A partner, a friend. Jake looked up at the viewing platforms, at the thousands of faces staring down at him. He knew what they expected. They expected him to mount the dragon and ride it through the sky, to demonstrate that he had conquered the unconquerable beast. That was how warriors proved their worth. That was how champions were made. But Jake was not a warrior, and he had conquered nothing. He turned to and held out his hand, palm up. It was not a command. It was a request. The dragon studied his hand for a moment. Then slowly, it lowered its great head and touched its muzzle to Jake's palm. Heat flowed between them, not burning but warm, a connection that needed no words. Jake climbed onto the dragon's back, rose on its powerful legs and spread its wings. They caught the sunlight, turning the arena into a cathedral of silver and gold. The dragon looked up at the sky. It had not flown freely in 300 years. And then it flew. The crowd gasped as launched into the air. The dragon's wings beat with tremendous power, carrying it higher and higher above the arena. Jake held on tightly, feeling the wind tear at his clothes, the heat of the dragon's body beneath him. They rose above the city, above the mountains, above the clouds themselves. The world spread out below them like a map, cities and forests and oceans painted in perfect detail. Jake had seen many things in his travels through the galaxy, but nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to flying on the back of a dragon. Roared, and this time the sound was different. It was not a challenge or a threat or a warning. It was joy, pure, ancient, overwhelming joy. For the first time in 10,000 years, the dragon was happy. They flew for an hour, circling the planet, dancing through clouds, celebrating a freedom that had forgotten existed. When they finally descended to the arena, the crowd was standing. Not cheering, not yet. They were too stunned for that. They simply stood and stared at the human who had done the impossible. Empress rose from her throne and walked down from the viewing platform. The crowd parted before her as she entered the arena and approached the human and the dragon. Her steps were measured, her face unreadable. She stopped before Jake Mercer, looking up at him where he sat upon's back. "Dismount," she said. Jake slid from the dragon's back and stood before her. He was small and tired and covered in dust and sweat. He looked nothing like the warriors who had come before him. He looked nothing like a champion. "My advisors tell me that this should not count," said. "They say you did not truly tame the dragon because you did not fight it. They say you used tricks and deception, that you somehow cheated the challenge." Jake said nothing. He simply waited. "They are fools," the Empress continued. "They have eyes but cannot see. They have minds but cannot understand." She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising to carry across the arena. "For 10,000 years, warriors have come to this place seeking glory. They have fought with every weapon and power known to the galaxy, and every single one of them has failed, because they all made the same mistake. They believed that strength meant dominance. They believed that tamming meant breaking. They believed that the only way to earn respect was to inspire fear. She turned back to Jake. This human showed us a different way. He looked at a creature we thought we understood and saw something we had never noticed. He offered kindness instead of violence. He offered patience instead of aggression. He offered understanding instead of dominance. The Empress reached into her robes and pulled out a medallion of living metal, the symbol of her champion. She held it out to Jake. You have earned this, human, not through conquest but through compassion, not through strength but through wisdom. You are the first to truly tame because you are the first to understand that tamming does not mean breaking. Jake took the medallion. It was warm in his hands, humming with a power he could feel in his bones. I didn't do this for glory, he said quietly. I didn't do this to prove anything about humans or become your champion. Then why? Asked. Jake looked at the ancient dragon who had chosen him, who had trusted him, who had shown him a friendship that crossed the boundaries of species and understanding. Because he was hurting, Jake said. And where I come from, when you see someone hurting, you help them, even if they're different from you, even if everyone else is afraid of them, even if they've been treated as a monster for so long that they've almost forgotten there's something more. The Empress was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that shocked her entire court. She bowed her head to Jake Mercer, a gesture of respect that no outsider had ever received. Your species is young, she said, but you carry wisdom that older civilizations have forgotten. I believe we have much to learn from each other. Word spread across the galaxy like fire. A human had tamed the metallic dragon of the Empire. A human had succeeded where 96 of the greatest warriors in existence had failed, not through strength or power or dominance, but through something far more dangerous. Through empathy, through understanding, through the simple, stubborn refusal to treat another being as an enemy. Other civilizations began to take notice of the small blue planet and its strange, soft creatures. They saw something that they had never expected. They saw a species that looked at the universe and asked not how can we conquer this, but how can we understand it. And high above the planet, a prime, Jake Mercer flew through the stars on the back of a metallic dragon, proving that humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their technology. It had always been their hearts.